a smile and nothing else? Me neither. But after 6 months of research, I found out that you can. So why not? Throughout America, our school systems tend to use a philosophy of the factory. Students are, based on age, put into boxes. 6-year-olds are put in first grade, 7-year-olds are put in second. And they are moved from teacher to teacher in these boxes until they are spit out of the other end. Except if you aren't good enough for one of those boxes. If you don't know how to read at a 3rd grade level, at the 3rd grade, then you are moved to a smaller box, a box set aside for those who are special, those with defects. This happens mainly with reading and math. If you don't fit to their arbitrary standards, then you're kicked out into that special area. And so we have a bunch of mental illnesses that may not even exist, such as dyslexia, which doesn't exist nearly as prominently as it does, or ADHD, where you're sitting in a classroom for 6 hours with no doubt. Many parents have looked at this system and also realized that these same people say that every human being is super different from each other, so much so that they can't be confined to such constraining categories as male and female. They looked at that system and went, well, that's a load of crud. And so they've either pulled their kids out of school or trained them up themselves, as you wonderful, great people have done, not sucking up at all. And I think we've turned out the better for it, if I may say so myself. But there are misconceptions that revolve around learning and memory in both camps. Very few people know how to consciously learn something, and even fewer know how to memorize. And so that's what I'm going to try and get you interested in today. I can't summarize everything there is to know about it, because it's a lot. But if I can at least get you interested, if you want to know more about memory, look up Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. It's every bit as amazing as it sounds. And Make It Stick with like 5 different authors, but there's only one Make It Stick, so if you search it up, you'll find it. I hope to get you interested in these 2 topics. With learning, there are 4 techniques that I found incredibly helpful and that stood out to me. The first one is a different way to use testing. CC does it very well with their blue books. The testings are low stakes. There isn't a passing or a failing grade, because when that occurs, especially in public and private school where your grade determines whether you move on or not, adrenaline kicks in, and energy is taken from your scholarly noggin to your stomach and to your fight and flight reflexes. It's on a low level, but enough to where some people can't draw information they were able to do before. Instead, use tests to find holes in your knowledge. In Apology of Science, at the end of every module, they have a study guide with questions about what happened in the chapter, so that when you go back to reread, you know what you don't know, and your brain knows what to look for. If you just reread over and over again to study something, your brain will not retain it. You'll think you're understanding it because there's an illusion of fluency that happens when you look at something over and over again because your brain recognizes it. But ultimately, you don't retain it, and under any kind of pressure, all that knowledge falls away. So that was one profound thing I saw. Using tests in a low-stakes fashion just to figure out where you're falling apart is incredibly useful. The next one is keyword outlines, and I hate saying those words because I went through essential, sent shivers down my spine, did not like it, but it turns out that my mom was right to force me to do it, as much as I hate to say it. There's one problem that can be fixed with it, and that's how tedious it is. It involves taking sentence by sentence in a paragraph and breaking it down into 3 words, and you can use as many symbols as you want, but you have to break it down into 3 words so that you can come back later and bring back that sentence and summarize it in your own words. The one way that this can be fixed, because it's overall good at forcing you to slow down, to consider what you're reading and looking at, and in many ways memorizing it just because you have to spend so much time with the material, but it's tedious. It's really stinking tedious. It takes a lot of time to go through. Maybe 2 years ago, I saw an article by a guy named Richard Ingermanson that shows how he writes books. It's called the snowflake method, and it's the keyword outline in reverse. He writes a general idea about what he wants to write about, and then he expands it to a paragraph. And then each sentence in those paragraphs, he expands to their own paragraphs, and so forth, until he covers about 4 pages worth of material. And that gave me an idea. You can move, instead of doing words to sentences, you can do sentences to paragraphs. This way it's practical, and you can use it in your real life. When you're next having trouble remembering something, or need to study for a test, take the time to just write a sentence for each of those paragraphs, or even a paragraph for a page if you're low on time. Summarizing something, making something simple, is often what makes people the most genius. When you see a genius engineer at work, they are moving with complex equations, but a real genius can explain it to you in normal people terms. That brings it to the third technique, the Richard Feynman technique. It's named after a physicist who was a brilliant teacher. He was a genius physicist, but he was known for summarizing things for normal people, a lot like C.S. Lewis does, where he can break tons and tons, especially in math. He got up to calculus. He could bring calculus down to a junior high level. And he considered himself a failure because he couldn't bring string theory to the high school level, which is just nuts. That's how good he was, though. And so his technique involves taking a blank piece of paper. This works best with concepts, especially in math. I've used it a ton. And just explaining the concept until you find out what you're doing wrong. This one technique takes days, but it's the only technique with a guarantee. Once you summarize what you're trying to learn on a piece of paper in a way that makes sense, I can guarantee you, you will have that knowledge mastered. And the final technique, and my favorite one, is the conspiracy theorist notes. I found this by accident several years ago, challenge 1. Mrs. Ivy sent us a video for debate for flow notes, where you fold up the page into 8 pieces, and then you diagram from page to page. And in the suggested feed of the YouTube video was a video by Thomas Frank, who talked about the different note-taking styles that he liked. And the final one was the flow notes. And when you do it with flow notes, you have to, it works best with a speaker or a lecturer or a pastor. You can do it with books, but it depends on the book. When you're listening to that person speak, you take and you write down things you don't know. You're not trying to record what's being said. You write down what you don't know. And you write them in these tiny little paragraphs. They aren't attached to any lines that are ruled on the page. They're just floating around in free space. And then you connect those connecting ideas with arrows. Many of you have seen these notes, and maybe you're finally understanding that I'm not an insane person. It looks a lot like a conspiracy theorist's corkboard with their red yarn and their push pins. But it lets you move quickly so that you can listen to the person and write at the same time, and you don't need to refer back to it almost ever. The downside is you can't show these notes to anybody else because it won't make sense, and they will think you're crazy. I know from experience. Second thing I want to talk about is mindset. I can be really short about this part. How you approach learning is incredibly important. And at the risk of sounding like a Buddhist monk, I hate talking about mindset for some reason because it makes me feel like a monk, but at least I'm fully clothed. So there are 2 kinds of mindsets, the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. Fixed mindsets believe there are limitations where there might not be any. The idea, well, my dad and I see it all the time because we're musicians. There's this mystical aura that surrounds mainly violinists, cellists, and pianos, where you'll see somebody, 7 to 8 times this year I've had it, where somebody says, I could never play like you because you're just so talented. They don't see the 12 years of work that went in beforehand. I've been playing since I was 6 years old. They just see the result. So they relegate all of that to talent. I can guarantee you that as long as those people stay that way, they will not learn the piano. Because if you don't think you can do it, you can't. You can take it too far with the growth mindset, where you believe that you can learn anything. You can take it too far because there are limitations on us. But first, you have to run into those limitations. You have to try, and you have to push yourself to that point. I like to do it with math, where I say math is impossible because I hate it, and it's the worst thing ever. But even math, I can learn calculus if I put my mind to it. And that's an important thing to understand. And finally, get to memory, which was a kind of big surprise when I started this thesis, because it was all about learning at first. But memory is crucial to it, because your skills mean nothing if you don't remember it. There's only one thing you need to know about memory. it's been hugely helpful. I started off challenge B, challenge 1, saying I have the memory of a baseball bat. So most things just bounce off. Occasionally something will make a dent, but nothing ever really sticks. And then maybe challenge 2 area, I started memorizing my speeches. And now I'm without notes. Because of this one technique, it's called the memory place. The method of Loki in some places. It's on a trivia table that you see sometimes at practicum, but I can't remember what subject it's about. But it uses 2 rules. One, that our brains remember locations better than it does text. Just immediately you can think of your house. You can walk through it mentally. You've been there so much. But you didn't have to consciously think about remembering that place. This technique uses that idea. And the second technique is the rule of insanity. You might be wondering where the hobo comes in to all of this. Well, which would you remember better? Your license plate or the fact that written on a cardboard sign, it says, "Don't think about pink elephants." It's being waved around by a dancing hobo, beard wafting in the air, tiara on his head, a tutu, smile, and then nothing else. You're going to remember how short that tutu was. You aren't going to remember your own license plate. So you use both of these techniques to get the method of Loki, where you put yourself at the entrance of a place you know well, generally your own house or the interior of a car. Then you take a list, say a grocery list, and you convert each item into an insane image and stick it next to objects throughout your house in the order that you want to remember them. So you'd walk in, put it near the shoe shelf, and then the couch, and then the dining room, and then the kitchen, and so forth. An example of an insane image, I did this exercise in class. It takes a while, so I won't do it here. But we had to remember a banana, a car, and I think a dress. That part's fallen out of my mind. But Mrs. Lake, when she thought banana, conveniently decided to stick a red tuft of hair to the top of it and black glasses and stick it in my spot in the class. To remember that's at the beginning of the list, because that's one of the first places you see when you walk into my classroom. So you take and you change these images into crazy things and stick them around your location. It sounds simple, but that is how you can memorize tons. So, in conclusion, the 4 techniques that should help you with learning are using testing not as a dipstick to tell where you are, but just as a way to find weak points. Keyword outlines, as much as I hate to say it, the Feynman technique, and conspiracy notes. You should all know that you can learn more than you already do, and don't assume limitations where they aren't. And you will remember hobos better than license plates. Thank you, and now stay for questions.